Welcome to YouTube. Welcome to
YouTube.
Reeling in the Years. Yeah, welcome to YouTube.
Welcome to YouTube. Welcome to the tubes of you, where you make dreams happen.
We should be good. Let me just check a sound wave form thingies.
Yo,
Those are good.
yo, is it working?
Yeah, and then let me get rid of that up because that's bad. Okay, I knew that was gonna happen. Echoing. We're good whenever you're ready.
All right. Hello, everybody, and welcome to Reeling in the Years, our music podcast where we go year by year and analyze each year to the fullest extent as we can go. With me today is co-host and fellow good-looking boy, Logan.
Hi. Yeah, I was gonna say we don't totally analyze these years. We do about as best as we can within the week of research that we can do.
Yeah, for what we can really do, yeah, it's pretty minimal, but it's still substantial in some cases. This year is 1969. This is a huge one.
Nice.
I think probably the biggest like standout years in music ever.
This was one of the ones that you pushed for sure, that you said that you had wanted to do soon.
Yeah,
so.
This is the year that a lot of people like signify just with 60s music and culture, just 1969 in general, just because of something we'll talk about later. But we're gonna try a little something different, I guess, because we haven't really pegged a format for the show. So
we're still playing with it.
So since historical events that occur do really influence a lot of the music that comes out, and especially in this year where war and protests were huge, we decided to put like kind of like a little historical events section where we kind of show you guys like what happened during that year and how it may have influenced some of the music that happened. So Logan, if you want to take that.
Yeah, so this was something that I had been thinking we should do for a while and something we got feedback on. But since we are jumping around so much throughout history, it's probably a good idea for us to then give you an idea of what history was like in that current period of time. Because like Michael said, culture obviously shapes music more often than not, which is why I'm excited to see where music goes over these next few years, because everybody hates Trump and everything that's going on with that. So I'm sure we'll get some good music because of that.
I'm sure we will.
But as far as 1969, so yeah, to just give you a quick snapshot of where we were in that time, more specifically the United States as well, not really a whole top down from what was happening on the planet at that time, but within the United States, Nixon took office that January, so his term began then. The United States was still active over in Vietnam. There was obviously a lot of protesting going on with that war. Nixon was also just asking the public in general to just trust him with what they were doing over there, which obviously many people didn't, which led to all kinds of protests and riots and all kinds of other things that were happening in that period of time.
Yeah.
As far as pop culture goes in sports and that kind of stuff, the New York Jets beat the Baltimore Colts in Super Bowl III. That is the Super Bowl that Joe Namath guaranteed they would win. So that happened.
Yeah, hasn't happened since.
Hasn't happened since. No, the Jets are horrible. What else? The Mets won the World Series against the Orioles that year. The Orioles were like heavily favored to win. I didn't look at basketball because I don't know. I don't even know if the NBA was around then. I can't even remember.
It might have been the ABA and the other one, and
might have been the ABA. I think it was the ABA.
I think it was the ABA.
As far as like other things that happened pop culture wise, the Oscars Best Picture that year was Midnight Cowboy. Best Actor was John Wayne in True Grit, and Best Actress, holy crap, it was Maggie Smith for The Prime of Miss Jean Brodie.
Is that Professor McGonagall?
That's Professor McGonagall.
Oh.
So she won Best Actress that year. And then probably the most notable single event that happened that year, whether you believe this happened or not, Apollo 11, we landed on the moon.
Whether you believe it or not. That was a good one.
So yeah, Apollo 11, we landed on the moon. I think Apollo, I can't remember from what I read. It was either 10 and 11 or maybe 9, 10, 11, and 12 all happened that same year. There was a bunch of missions beforehand that basically we went up there to like prepare for the actual manned mission to the moon that happened that July.
What was the one that failed?
Apollo 13 was the failed one,
Was
but
that the failed one?
they
Okay.
got that's the one the movie's based off of. But they got home there. As far as like
There was
the one where the one where it like exploded in midair, that was the Challenger, but that was like in the 80s.
There was an Apollo mission that got messed up. I don't know.
Apollo 13 was one that messed up, but they all got home. Like
Yeah.
that was
Okay, maybe that's
a
the one I'm
really
thinking of.
intense situation for like a few days there.
Yeah.
But they got somehow by
Is that the one with,
miracle
is that
they
the one
all
with
got
Tom
back.
Hanks and
Tom Hanks and Kevin Bacon.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. I feel you.
Yeah. So they all got home after that. But yeah, we landed on the freaking moon. Whether you think that happened or whether you think Stanley Kubrick shot the moon landing video in some warehouse or something like that, I don't really know. But we landed on the moon this year.
Yeah, it's pretty sick.
So that's kind of just a quick top down of where everything was at. Oh, the other thing, one last thing. AIDS, the first reported cases of AIDS also started showing up in the US this year.
I didn't know that.
I thought kind of interesting.
That's super interesting, yeah. It's important to note that like not only did this kind of stuff really shape this year in particular, but also like going forward. I mean, like if you look at stuff, and this might be going a little off topic slightly, but like if you look at stuff in the 90s, like Rage Against the Machine, they talked a lot about Nixon and stuff like that, and a lot of this kind of stuff really gets influenced, and especially the AIDS thing. That's a big 80s thing that happened too. I think they had that whole concert like Live Aid or something like that.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's.
I mean, this whole Vietnam era was the music was very much influenced by the decisions that the government was making at that time. So
Yeah.
Looking at Vietnam only, I think that was the thing that had the biggest impact on the music during this time period. For sure.
Definitely. So yeah, that was our little historical bit. And going forward, we're gonna look at the top 10 songs of the year, the Billboard top 10. Never heard of this one, but or maybe I have. I just don't.
You have.
Know it. Is number 1 was "Sugar Sugar" by the Archies. Do you know?
Yeah,
okay.
This is dun 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 dun. Oh, that stupid song.
Yeah,
I'm pretty sure that's what it is. Like,
yeah,
I listened to it.
Yeah. Okay.
So
man, that was number 1.
Yeah, that song was number 1.
Wow. That's I said by the Archies. Number 2 was Aquarius, "Let the Sunshine In" by The Fifth Dimension. I don't know if I know this one either.
I know that song.
I do.
Yeah, you know that song. Yeah.
Okay. I'm just gonna have to listen to all the rest of these. I do know though. "I Can't Get Next to You" by The Temptations was number 3. "Honky Tonk Woman" by the Rolling Stones was number 4. I'm gonna say this about this is that I believe "Let It Bleed" came out this year, right? Am I wrong?
Yes, it did.
And then did another album by the Rolling Stones come out? Because this is not on. Let It Bleed.
I don't think so. I think they released "Honky Tonk" as a single, or it released the previous year and was still on the charts going into this year.
Because "Let It Bleed" is like one of the only albums by the Rolling Stones that I really like. I'm not a big Stones fan, but
I'm not a big Stones fan either.
But "Let It Bleed" was a really great one. But I don't think "Honky Tonk" one. Well, whatever. Number 5, "Everyday People" by Sly and the Family Stone. That's an awesome song. Jeff Buckley does a really cool cover of it, and so Joan Jett does a cover of that, and it's really odd. I'm not really into that one. "Dizzy" by Tommy Roe was number 6. Number 7, "Hot Fun in the Summertime" by Sly. Wow, Sly and the Family Stone getting 2 in there. Sly's awesome. I love Sly.
Okay, this is totally weird. You go ahead and continue, and then we'll come back to something here.
Okay.
I found out about one of these other songs on the list.
Okay. "I'll Never Fall in Love Again" by Tom Jones was number 8. Number 9, "Build Me Up Buttercup" by The Foundations was number 9. And, of course, "Crimson and Clover" by Tommy James and the Shondells was number 10. What a What a pretty, this is probably the first time that I actually knew a lot of the songs from this list.
I knew a decent amount of them just by looking at it as
I
well.
wasn't like, huh? What?
Some of
What was
them I
this?
didn't recognize the names at first, and then I like jumped onto
Yeah.
YouTube or Spotify or whatever and listened to it. And I was like, oh, duh, I know that song.
Yeah. So yeah, it was a pretty solid list. I really like "Build Me Up, Buttercup." I think it's a pretty good song. I
Okay,
love that song.
so this is totally weird. I didn't know it. I did not know this was even a thing. I probably should have looked this up beforehand. Sugar Sugar by the Archies is one of 16 animated music segments created to be shown on the Archie Comedy Hour on CBS TV in 1969. And it is actually like Archie Comics. Like that
No
is-
way.
that's what it's from. So like
No way.
there's a television cartoon of that back in the day, I guess, and that's where that song came from. And it
No way.
charted that high.
Holy crap.
It quickly rose to the #1 spot on the Billboard Hot 100, where it remained for 4 weeks, giving the Archies their first gold record and becoming the #1 song for 1969,
Wait a
according
second.
to Billboard magazine.
Wait a second. You said first.
Yeah.
What was the second? Well, did they have more?
Their second gold record was Jingle Jangle. So they did have a second gold record, actually,
Wow,
Michael.
okay.
So way to discriminate against Archie and friends.
I'm sorry, Archie and friends.
That's totally weird, though, for sure.
That's different. But you know what? At the same time, there's like, if we go at a time like now, like La La Land, I wouldn't have been surprised if like one of those songs were in the top 10.
For sure. Yeah.
know?
Like it makes sense. Again, this is where it comes into play where you and I don't know everything that happened back then. So we're just totally oblivious to some of this stuff. I mean, it makes sense, but I never knew. I've heard that song 1,000 times. I never knew that song came from.
That's from an Archie show from
An Archie
1969.
Yeah, exactly. So it's weird. Aquarius, Let the Sunshine In.
Is that like the age of Aquarius?
It's Let the Sun. It's from Hair. It's
Okay. Yeah. I know exactly.
Yeah, I was trying to think of how the first part goes because I know that's the back part of the song.
Yeah, I know exactly what that song is.
So that was #2. That we'll get to that in a second, but because I actually added Billboard sales charts this year too, so now we can see as well what charted high according to Billboard, but also what sold the best by album.
You gave me that link for that over here.
Yeah, so we can find that later. You should just be able to click on it, I think. But yeah, more this week, I think that we recognize more than anything. Again, it is very much always tied to, I think, the pop charts, which is what Billboard inherently is. And like we've talked about, I think we got into this during the last episode, but there are separate charts with Billboard that we could go into. And we've talked about that because the top Hot 100 always is pop. I mean, that's just always.
Yeah.
I mean, it'd still be like that today. Like if we went and looked at the Hot 100 today, it would be, I don't know, Pitbull, Flo Rida. I don't listen to anything. Katy Perry, stuff like that. Like it would be those kind of songs compared to the Foo Fighters and things like that.
And that's because I would say it's because of the media that it's in. So like, for example, for this Archie's thing, right? This was obviously all over TV where like TV was actually, because nowadays like nobody really watches that much TV. I don't think they usually watch their TV through Netflix or something like that where they don't have ads or anything like that. But they're getting this from like a TV show, right? And then they like this song that they hear at a TV show, and they're gonna go and buy that record or whatever at a record store if that even exists, which obviously does. There is a 45 of this song somewhere, and I want to maybe get it. And I guess that's similar to now. Like people buy soundtracks to movies and television and everything like that. So I don't think that's like weird by any case. It's just interesting to see that was #1 out of all the things that came out this year.
Mm-hmm. As far as the Rolling Stones go, real quick, before we transition to our next thing, in Honky Tonk Women, the song was only released as a single. There was a country version of the song that was released on Let It Bleed, strangely enough. So it did come kind of on Let It Bleed, but it wasn't the same version of the single. The B-side to this was You Can't Always Get What You Want.
Okay.
So It was
Okay.
it was a single only, so
Okay.
that answers that question as well.
Yeah. For me, like after Let It Bleed, like I just don't like the Rolling Stones anymore. Like I just throw them out. Like Let It Bleed's an awesome album. After that, not really cool.
Yeah,
I
well,
don't really dig 'em.
yeah, I'll give a little bit more of my opinion on the Stones later when we get
Yeah.
into our personal section.
Absolutely. So let's
Yeah.
look at the Billboard sales charts. I just pulled up the link thing here, and looking at it, did White Album come out? White Album didn't come out this year, right?
No,
It came out the year
but
before.
it came out the year before, but it still charted heavily into the first couple of weeks of this year.
Yeah. So like, first month January, the Beatles' White Album was. Oh, and there was like a really brief split, but basically throughout January and February, it charted the top.
It was the number one selling album for pretty much all of January and February.
Yeah. And then right in the middle there was Diana Ross and the Supremes with TCB was the album name. I don't know what's on that album,
I don't know either.
but there was probably a hit on there that we would probably recognize. After that, in March, Glenn Campbell's Wichita Lineman came out and charted number one. Then we have Blood, Sweat, and Tears, which is weird because they're playing by me really soon at the Genesee Theater in Waukegan. Then Glenn Campbell again, Blood, Sweat, and Tears. Then Hair dominated.
Yeah, Hair pretty much went
For
on
like-
a run.
For like 3 months, just went crazy. Which
And
is
then,
kinda-
strangely enough, the thing that took them off of that run was Blood, Sweat, and Tears
Blood,
again.
Sweat, and Tears again.
3 months later. So
That's so weird. So yeah, like really, Blood, Sweat, and Tears really went crazy between March.
Blood,
and,
Sweat, and Tears was
in
top on
August.
the charts.
Like it was obviously top, like within the top 10 for March, end of March to late August. You know.
Yeah, yeah.
And
It,
maybe
had,
even
it was
after that.
it was number one on the charts for at least 7 weeks this year.
Yeah. After that weird run of Hair and Blood, Sweat, and Tears, Johnny Cash at San Quentin was the in September and August, in between that little split there. Blind Faith, wasn't that's Eric Clapton, right? Isn't Eric Clapton in Blind Faith?
Pretty darn sure, yes.
That was later part of September. Creedence Clearwater Revivals. Is this their debut?
It's Eric Clapton, Ginger Baker, Steve Winwood, and Rick Gretsch.
Yeah,
That's a mouthful
That's
of a
a
name. Rick Gretsch. Lots of
Is this Creedence's first album?
I don't think so. No.
Okay, well, Green River by Creedence Clearwater Revival was
I can
October's.
search all things for you as you bring them.
I think Green River. I looked up the track listing. I didn't know any of the songs, at least by name. I feel like a lot of the ones that I would know are definitely in the 70s. So, Abbey Road.
third studio album
Oh,
by
okay.
Creedence Clearwater Revival.
Abbey Road, big one, was charted number one in November, all of November, and then
Pretty
December,
much the rest of the year.
and the rest of the year, and then Led Zeppelin came in hot with Led Zeppelin 2 in December, last week of December.
Last week of the year. Yeah.
So,
those were all the top. Those were all the highest sales sold
Again,
albums
like-
per week this year.
unlike the previous years that we looked at, like these are albums that have been like, yeah, these would have charted, right? And they were those, like Abbey Road.
Yeah.
If somebody told me Abbey Road was 1960, I'm like, that obviously was a number one album during that year. Led Zeppelin 2 is another one. The first Led Zeppelin album isn't on here, but this is also American charts, not UK charts. I'm sure in the UK charts they were much higher. Hair is like that makes sense as well because that was huge back then. People still
That was huge for like 20 years or something
forever.
like that. Yeah.
So it still is, really. People, I mean, say it's one of the best musicals and all that stuff. I've never seen it or really
I've never seen it either.
listened to much of the things that are on there, but people stand by it. And Beatles' White Album's a pretty big one, too. I mean, I've heard of Blood, Sweat, and Tears. I've just never.
I've heard of them
No.
as well. They're a
really
jazz
listened to 'em.
group. I can't believe I've never listened to them, honestly.
Yeah.
But yeah, they held. It seemed like it was Hair, Blood, Sweat, and Tears, and then pretty much the Beatles bookending the year with both Abbey Road and the White Album. So
Honestly, the big one, and this again goes with, we don't really know the culture of that time, but like I find it weird that like Blind Faith made it on the top, like they were the top spot.
I mean,
for a
well, they
brief
had,
moment.
they had a following there.
Yeah.
For a while, especially since they were coming off of, they weren't coming off of it, but they had already been in Cream. So like they had a following, so it makes sense for people to flock to that right away.
That's true.
So,
but yeah, so that was the Billboard sales charts in 1969, at least on an album basis.
Yeah, I felt like it was good to include those so we could at least see the public what they were purchasing this year, rather than just Billboard saying here's what it is. Again, I still don't know how I feel about Billboard overall. Like I feel like we have to go to it just because
it is the thing that tells us like what really charted, but
it is. But at the same time, like it's still so strange to me looking at the top 100. They're the Hot 100 top 10 songs that we always do. Like the Beatles came out with an album this year. Nothing was in the top 10. So
we have to put into context that this is the U.S. like charts.
It is. That's true as well.
I feel like UK charts are always slightly different and skewed to UK bands like the Beatles and Led Zeppelin and all.
I'm also wondering like how certain albums were received at the time compared to the way we look at them now, because I actually was doing some research about Abbey Road, which we'll get into in more depth here in a couple minutes. But I guess the album, when it first came out, it was like people were really lukewarm on it. Obviously, it sold incredibly well because it's the Beatles, so it's of course going to sell. But critically, people were like, "This is okay, I guess." And of course, looking back on it now in retrospect, everybody's like, "Oh wow, that's probably their best album." So.
That's the thing that I find great about looking at the Billboard charts is like looking at the dichotomy of feelings between how people felt then and how I think people feel now. Because how people feel now is like you said with Abbey Road, like that is, in my opinion as well, is probably the best Beatles album. White Album I think is a really great one too. Like I'm not a huge fan of it, but I think it overall is a really great album too. But yeah, Abbey Road is like the best Beatles album, and to think that like people were lukewarm on it in '69 is kind of odd.
It was pretty experimental at the time too.
It was, but so was Sgt. Pepper's. People love that album. Yeah. So
I mean, it still sold really well just because it was the Beatles. But I don't know. It's probably hard at the moment to look amongst their entire catalog of music and rank it properly.
Yeah,
at release. So
that's true.
But yeah, that was that. I guess that was the sales charts. But yeah, we also decided to include the Grammys this year, though.
Yeah, absolutely. I think we did that last time too.
It was very. I think we didn't like skirt around it, but we very like mentioned it in passing. Like, I think this and this one, and that was about it. And we're not going to break down every single category with this either. I listed some of the ones that I thought were notable and things that I wasn't really aware of. Which obviously you always look at Song of the Year, Record of the Year, all that stuff. Record of the Year for 1969. And the weird thing about this too is that the Grammys always take place the following year. And I think most people are familiar with this, but if you're not, so the Grammy or the entire year of 1969, and then through like the early part of I think it may just be confined to the 1969 calendar year, actually.
Yeah, I think it is too.
I think there's a cutoff, but the awards themselves usually aren't until like, they typically fall in like February now. I think they used to be back in like April back then.
Yeah.
So it always falls the year after. So for 69, the record of the year was Aquarius, Let the Sunshine In by the Fifth Dimension. Album of the year was Blood, Sweat and Tears by Blood, Sweat and Tears. Song of the year was Joe South for Games People Play. And best new artist was Crosby, Stills, and Nash. As far as there's a couple others I threw in here just because I thought they were somewhat notable. Best original score for a motion picture was Burt Bacharach for his work on Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid, which has like the most notable song from that movie would be Raindrops Keep Falling on My Head, which he wrote for that movie. So that was what won for Best Motion Picture. Best Instrumental Arrangement was Henry Mancini for the love theme from Romeo and Juliet, which that song kept popping up on like a lot of the lists that I was looking at for this year. Strangely, like that one love theme from Romeo and Juliet was like all like sold a ton of copies as far as like the 45 goes or whatever, the single version of it. It was like I was seeing that all over the place, so I felt like that was worth mentioning. And then the last one that I threw in here just almost as something that I had no idea about, but thinking about it now makes total sense. Johnny Cash won Best Performance for a Country Song. Best Country Song went to Johnny Cash for A Boy Named Sue, but Shel Silverstein wrote that song, which is not mind-boggling because, again, makes total sense, but I had no idea that happened. So
that's weird.
That is a crossover I never thought would happen. The dude writing freaking Where the Sidewalk Is also is writing for Johnny Cash. So
when you showed me these notes and I saw Shel Silverstein, I was like, is that the same Shel Silverstein or is it a different Shel Silverstein?
No, it's him.
It's that one, which is awesome.
It's really cool, but it's something I had absolutely no idea about going into this. But then when I thought of the song for half a second, I was like, okay, this all makes a lot of sense now that I think about it for a moment.
That's great.
So yeah,
that's great.
We have, so I don't know what you want to do.
So you have
notable releases, but I didn't really go in depth with it, and I don't know if we want to just scroll through our page.
I mean, notable releases is something that we'll talk about just because, like, in our personal favorites. You know what I'm saying? Because that's what we feel are the notable releases, and we kind of went through that with the Billboard stuff and all that garbage. But we can't look at notable events that occurred.
Yes.
And one of
which I also didn't get all the way through, but I kind of got through.
Well, we got a really big one, so it'll take up most of the time.
That's true. I totally forgot about that. I didn't even write it in.
So January 30th, the Beatles had their final concert on the roof of Apple Records, which if you look at Get Back, that music video, that is what that is.
There's a good chance you've seen it. It was the final performance they ever did as a band before they split up. And then obviously because John died and they never got to play again together after that. I'm sure they probably played again together. In fact, I know they played again together behind the scenes, but live performance, like for the public to see in some capacity, that was the last one.
Yeah. And some really great, it's a great show. Like everybody should watch it.
It is. Like I was watching it on YouTube last night.
It's really amazing. Yeah. On March 20th, still Beatles related, John and Yoko Ono are married and thus disband the Beatles.
That's pretty much the only reason I felt like I needed to include that within the notes. I was like, well, kind of led to their downfall, sort of. That's at least what a lot of people say, but
I mean, like maybe I don't know. It seems
we'll get into a whole Beatles conversation, I think, here in a little bit because
it's a little coincidental, is all.
I think they're a huge part of this year, and we haven't even really talked about them yet. Going along with that, though, so they get married on March 20th, March 25th through the 31st. They do their whole John and Yoko bed-in thing to protest the Vietnam War, and if you're not familiar with that, which if you follow the Beatles in any capacity, you've probably seen pictures of John and Yoko surrounded by tons of media members taking pictures of them as they just literally sat in bed for like an entire week and protested the war in Vietnam. And it's kind of weird, I guess, but I don't know. It's good for them. But that's how they spent their honeymoon too, which was also strange. So
yeah. That's kind of odd.
And they think they did that again later in the year too, at another point. But that was like the notable one that I think people are familiar with.
Yeah. Honestly, the last thing that I think we should definitely talk about is Woodstock.
Yes.
Which is just crazy. I think Woodstock, let me see where it occurred. It's August 15th through the 17th. 1969. It was in New York, I believe. Yeah, New York State, on a farm, or farmland. And I think it was free. I'm reading. I'm just reading a Wikipedia page, so take this as it is. But it says that the late change in venue, so I guess they changed the venue, did not give the festival organizers enough time to prepare. At a meeting 3 days before the event, organizers felt they had two options. One was to complete the fencing and ticket booths, without which the promoters were almost certain to lose their shirts. The other option involved putting their remaining available resources into building the stage, without which the promoters feared they would have a disappointed and disgruntled audience. So I guess they built the stage, and the fences of Woodstock became an oxymoron, while the stage at Woodstock gave birth to a legend. I don't know, whatever. So yeah, it was a free concert, which is interesting, because this is like one of the most legendary
free concert, a free festival for
festivals.
3 days.
Yeah, and names such as, like, there's some really notable performances here. On a personal favorite, like Richie Havens was one of my favorites, and he's the one who started the festival. On that same day, you had like Joan Baez and Ravi Shankar. Those are some of the people those are just some on that Friday on August 15th that performed. On that Saturday, the next day, Santana played, which is an awesome performance. I think the drummer, he's like one of the youngest drummers. He was only like 20 years old. He was the youngest. On here it says he was the youngest musician to play at the festival. There was Mountain, who what's that one song that they do?
Mississippi Queen.
Yeah, Mississippi Queen. They played. Canned Heat played. Grateful Dead, Creedence Clearwater Revival, Janis Joplin, Sly and the Family Stone, The Who, and Jefferson Airplane, who closed out the show, all played on Saturday. That's insane. That it would be crazy to go see that.
You wouldn't realize it at the time what you were saying.
No,
I'm sure.
But
or maybe you did because you like time traveled back to go watch Woodstock, because it's like well regarded as one of the best festivals ever, if not the best festival.
Yeah. And then Sunday, throughout Monday, Joe Cocker, who did his a lot of people know he did the cover of With a Little Help from My Friends, also was done by what's his name, John Belushi, and it's that same performance that he's mocking.
I was gonna say the Beatles.
Yeah.
No.
But yeah, like John Belushi is the one who's like trying to do his impersonation of Joe Cocker, and that's the performance that he got that from. But
Joe Cocker also released a couple albums this year. I forget what they were.
Yeah, he did. I think it was called With a Little Help from My Friends. I remember. Yeah, I think so. I might be wrong. But then 10 Years After played, who was a pretty big band at the time. Johnny Winter, who's an awesome guitar player. And I guess Edgar Winter played with him on a few songs. Blood, Sweat, and Tears played. Crosby, Stills, Nash and Young played. And then closing it out, Jimi Hendrix, which is probably his most notable performance. I think the Monterey Festival was a better one, probably. But
if you go to Walmart right now and you're looking for Jimi Hendrix performance DVDs, you're probably gonna find the Woodstock one. If I'm being honest,
more than likely you will. So yeah, that was that. It was just an insane, legendary festival.
I mean, we could probably, there's enough research to be had with Woodstock as a whole where we could probably do an entire episode on it. And I didn't remember until half an hour ago that it happened this year. I somehow totally just skipped over that during my research for the show. So yeah, it's cool. It's for sure cool. It seems like it was one of those first music festivals that ever really took place. And I think that's why it's so foundational to not only music, but just to that time period too. Again, it was so much an anti-war thing in one sense, because I mean, just look at all the bands that were playing there at the time. And there's everything we talked about, how everything was so rooted in a lot of bands' messages during that time were rooted in anti-war statements and things like that, and almost all of those bands there had some songs or another that dealt with what was happening over in Vietnam. So, yeah, it's really cool to look back on. I guess they tried to revive it a couple times. Didn't really work. Probably didn't really work because you can't. It's not about the name. I think the reason that that Weekend or whatever is so legendary is because of all those names of the bands that we just listed off of. Which, looking at them now, they're like all legendary in their own right. But like we said, like I'm sure people had no idea at the time what they were witnessing.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, there's some interesting things here that I'm looking at, and there's declined invitations and missed connections. So like there's this list of bands that like could have played and didn't, and that would have made it insane if they had. Like they had Bob Dylan on this list, Jeff Beck Group. They had disbanded though, I think right after or before then, something like that. The Doors considered it, Led Zeppelin, The Byrds, Chicago, the Moody Blues, Frank Zappa, Free, Spirit, like Procol Harum, Jethro Tull. Like there's this list. I'm like, what if those guys play? Like that would be insane to see all those guys play, especially bands like Led Zeppelin and stuff like that play a show here. And that would I think that would have been like Zeppelin's first like American festival show at that point because it was 1969. So yeah. Crazy. If you want to watch any of those, you could go on YouTube. I'm sure they'll have almost every performance.
I'm sure they're archived there.
Yeah.
Not sure how the camera work is. I've been watching older concerts lately, some of them from like the 60s and 70s. I don't know what half of those people were thinking while they were shooting that. Like, oh man, what if I just like zoomed in and out, back and forth for like the next 3 minutes here? I bet that would add a really cool effect. It's like, please stop. I'm going to vomit. I just want to watch this performance, please.
Right.
Doing that. So,
yeah, it's pretty bad.
As far as like other notable events, so I've been looking through here to try to find some others. The only really other one that I see is that Elvis went back to Vegas and was continuing to perform there because he was still around and he was still active at this time. But it was that latter portion of his career where he was pretty much only doing Vegas shows from then forward, up until his death, like 5 years later or so, or 3 or 4 years later, something around there.
Yeah.
So that was pretty much what he was doing at this point. But yeah, there's a bunch of other small things, but nothing I don't really think is worth deep diving into. The Beatles were having all kinds of problems with money, and they were in all kinds of court cases in the early portion of this year, trying to figure out what was up with their music and Apple Records and all kinds of other stuff. So yeah, as far as like notable like events or concerts or things like that, I mean, we're going to get into it here in a couple minutes about the albums and things like that, the release that we haven't really touched on yet, but I think that's about it pretty much.
Yeah. I feel like Woodstock really covers that front. I don't know. I don't remember if the Monterey Pop Festival happened after or before. That was a pretty big one.
Isle of Wight also happened this year. Couple weeks after Woodstock, actually, like 2 weeks after Woodstock, Isle of Wight Festival was held. And people who played there, it was like the band, Joe Cocker, Bob Dylan, The Who, the Moody Blues, bunch of groups like that. So
I'm wondering if this is the same Isle of Wight that had like the very famous Who performance, where it's like the album Isle of Wight.
I think it might be, because I'm actually looking at Isle of Wight right now, because it was held 3 years from 68 until 70. I think the Who was only there in 69. It says the Who was here in 69. The Who was there in 69. The Who was also there in 70, and it actually has an annotation here. It said their 1970 performance was the one that produced a live album. So that's probably the one you're thinking of.
What's interesting though is that this one says that they had the entirety of Tommy, right? Did they do that twice then? Because the Isle of Wight album, if you get the deluxe version that they have out now, they do the entire Tommy, like the whole album.
I'm gonna guess they didn't do it twice, but I don't know. So wait, where does it say they performed it?
So on the it says I'm at the Isle of Wight 1969, and it says
so you say you're saying they did it for both 69 and 90, or 70. Maybe they recorded the 69 one and put it in as like a deluxe packaging thing.
They might have done that,
or maybe they just came back the following year and they're like, "Hey, good response last year. They're gonna play this whole album again."
What's weird about it is that I feel like it's the same set list also, because it says they opened with Heaven and Hell, followed by I Can't Explain, Fortune Teller, Young Man Blues. Like that all sounds like exactly what the Isle of Wight concert or the album is, the live album is. And if it's not the same one, it's odd because they played almost the exact same set 2 years in a row at the same place. But
I guess so. We don't have it in our doc, but I guess the one thing we would get into before we start gushing about our personal stuff is the bands that were formed, which you and I looked over quickly before we started. These are bands that formed this year and not necessarily put out an album or anything like that. So there's not a lot of huge ones. I mean, there's a lot looking at this list we've got here, but not a ton of like really notable ones. Judas Priest was one. Another was Hall & Oates. Who else did you say? Faces?
Well, yeah, Faces is pretty big. I believe Faces had like Rod Stewart and stuff like that in there. Yeah, if I'm remembering correctly. Humble Pie is also a big one. That had Steve Marriott, who was in the Small Faces. And I believe some of the Small Faces made Faces with Rod Stewart. I believe that's how it worked. It was weird.
It's hard to keep all of it like track on. It's hard to keep all of it in your head as you run over it. Badfinger also came together this year, and there's a bunch of groups that like put out their first albums this year, but again, they probably formed a few years before that. So these bands that are coming together here, I don't think that most of them even put out their debut albums until a few years later.
Yeah.
But these are the bands that started coming together this year. The Plastic Ono Band.
Oh,
that great band with John Lennon and Yoko Ono. So yeah.
Where it just sounds like somebody's dying the entire time. I
freaking hate them.
Oh my God.
Screw
Oh man. Yeah, Humble Pie.
Quick jump to the present. Have you ever listened to Yoko Ono's bands that she has like today?
No.
That's something I may need to introduce you to after the show.
Like bad or good?
Just I don't even know how to describe it. It's definitely not good. I'll say that much.
Okay. I'll take your word for it.
I'll send you some links after the show, and if you're out there listening, you should look those up as well, because wow. Screw Yoko Ono.
Jesus Christ. All right. Are we going to my personal favorite section?
Yeah, I guess we can jump to that. I feel like we've done a better, more concise job. We're trying to get better with the layout of everything.
We'll have to do a little like tailoring to how we go into each one. Segues. We need some segues.
It's easy to jump into like Model Citizen Show or something like that, just because it's just us talking and having conversations, and we just hit a record button and then put it out for people to listen to. Yeah. This we try to make a little bit more flow, a little bit better and stuff like that, so it's harder.
Yeah, it's getting there.
It's also hard not to talk about our personal favorites throughout the whole show, but we can do that now, so yay.
Yeah. Logan, what were some of your personal favorites from this year?
Let's get right into it and talk about the fact that Led Zeppelin put out Led Zeppelin 1 and Led Zeppelin 2 both in the same year.
Those are good albums.
Those are both really freaking good albums.
Now the reason why I didn't put it in mine is because we were just going to talk about it anyway, because one of us were going to.
Yeah, that was the thing. I was trying to avoid putting too many obvious ones in. So Led Zeppelin 1. We'll break them down one by one. First off, this is just a side note, like on this year as a whole. Again, I think we mentioned this in 76, like, oh, wow, it seems like some groups are putting out like 2 albums this year. That must have been like a really frequent thing back then, because there was a lot of notable bands that were putting out 2 albums. Like Abbey Road also came out this year, but Get Back comes out really soon after that in 1970. Yeah. So the groups back then it was not this record tour thing. Like if and it was obviously all the bands toured for the most part, but it seemed like they could record more if they wanted to, rather than being tied down to some 80 city tour in 90 days or something like that. So
yeah, I feel like a lot of people do this, but they'll write while they're touring, and then they'll just, I think more so at that time though, they would just, do their tour and then write while they're recording, and then go straight into the recording studio right after that.
Yeah.
And then record an album in like a week, and then and then release it. But
yeah. So Led Zeppelin. We talked about them in '76 when they came out with, what was it? Presence?
Was that Presence?
Presence.
It was Presence. Yeah.
It's
my personal favorite.
Both of these albums are better than Presence. I think Led Zeppelin 1 is much better than 2. I actually listened to Led Zeppelin 1 this afternoon. That album is just hit after hit after hit, especially for being their first album.
Mm-hmm.
It's kind of insane, even though they did steal some of them, which is probably something we should mention about that first album.
Oh yeah. We talked about Small Faces, right? I mean, on Led Zeppelin 2, Whole Lot of Love is straight up like a ripoff of I believe a Small Faces song. And a lot of their songs are straight up ripoffs of blues songs. They rip line for line songs from various blues artists. And I mean, for better or worse or whatever, Led Zeppelin much more popular and some would say better, but it doesn't. I mean, I don't know. I don't know if that makes me not like it as much or whatever, but I really do like Led Zeppelin 1. I think it's a great album. But yeah,
part of the reason why I said I like this album so much is that it is so much blues charged compared to some of their other albums. Like, the background to Led Zeppelin is inherently blues beats. Like,
oh yeah,
so that's where they come from. But this album, more than the rest, is totally like just. It has that blues feeling to it, and that's apparent with You Shook Me, or Dazed and Confused, or How Many More Times, or Babe, I'm Gonna Leave You, which is not their song, but is one that they actually did a cover of. Like, front to back, the album is just really good, and it's really cohesive too. That's the other thing I like, is that each song leads into the other, like, and they go from like highs of the, like, it starts out with like Good Times, Bad Times, which is just a great intro song. And then they immediately bring the tone down with Babe, I'm Gonna Leave You. And then they amp it back up with, I think it's You Shook Me. I'm pretty sure is track number 3. It is.
I know 4 is Dazed and Confused.
Yeah. And then it's You Shook Me, and then they go into Dazed and Confused. And then the latter half of that album really starts jamming together with Your Time Is Gonna Come, going into Black Mountain Side, and then going into Communication Breakdown. Like, it just goes, that's my problem with some albums, not only today, but just throughout all of history, is that they will put, I think like track placement on an album is more important than people give it credit for, because I know I like to listen to albums from front to back really often, and they will put, some groups will just put like 3 really quick and heavy songs, like back to back to back, and then they'll bring it down for like a couple songs in a row, where it's like, I feel like they could have spread that out and paced that a little bit better. So
yeah,
that's the one thing I think is really good with this album. But yeah, they totally didn't write all of these songs themselves, so
no, they didn't. But doesn't mean it's not a great album. That album is really good, and is like one of the, as a drummer, is one of my main influences. I could bring this camera downstairs, right, and I could show you my drum set, and that's a John Bonham drum set. And this album is one of those reasons why I have this drum set. It's because songs like Good Times, Bad Times, and Dazed and Confused like influenced my playing as a whole. Like, in general, if you watch me play drums, you could tell that there are a few specific people that I'm influenced by, and John Bonham's certainly one of them, and it is because of this album, because this album is a really great drum album.
Most Zeppelin albums are very great. This one specifically
is an amazing drum album.
It really is. Jumping to Led Zeppelin 2.
Yeah.
Good album, not my favorite. I think I don't want to say it's a tad bit overrated, because I really don't hear many people say it's like
I think 4 is
one
the
of the
most
best.
overrated.
I think 4 is the one that's most talked about. It's a good album though. Like there's a lot of good tracks. Whole Lot of Love's the notable one that everybody.
I like the Heartbreaker into Lemon song. Like
it's actually What Is and Should Never Be into the Lemon song.
Is that what it is?
And that is probably the best song on the album.
I thought it does the Heartbreaker.
What does Heartbreaker is track number 5, and that goes into Living Loving Maid. She's just a woman.
Maybe that's the one I'm thinking of, where it does like. Yeah. Okay.
So it's Whole Lot of Love, which
okay,
awesome track, like one of the best like guitar solos. Probably one of my favorite guitar solos. It's nothing like super complicated, but I just like the back and forth to it. What Is and Should Never Be is maybe, and What Is and What Should Never Be is maybe my favorite song on the album. The Lemon song's pretty good. Thank You is pretty good. Heartbreaker is good. That's like one of the first songs I ever learned to play on guitar. It's super easy.
That's one of the first songs my brother and I played together, like as a group.
It's pretty simple.
Yeah,
that went down pretty quickly. Living Loving Maid, She's Just a Woman is a good upbeat track. Ramble On, I feel like has gotten like really popular within the last few years for some reason. Actually,
Ramble On is a cool song.
I like that song a lot. They played Ramble On at their last concert in the UK, and people were like surprised they pulled that one out and performed it. And ever since then, I feel like I've heard it so much more on the radio. Maybe that's just me going crazy, but I still remember the day that Led Zeppelin concert happened, because I was like dying inside, wishing I could go to it somehow, even though I was like 12, maybe.
Yeah, we were pretty young.
So. But they played Ramble On, and like I feel like everybody's been played that song a little bit more since then. Moby Dick, which is freaking an awesome song. Yeah. Obviously notable for John Bonham's drum solo in the middle of it. Also notable just because that riff is awesome. I totally dig that riff that Jimmy Page has. I think it's one of his dirtier ones, but it gets the job done for that song.
Yeah.
And then Bring It On Home rounds out the album, which is another solid track. In the end, really good album. I don't think there's anything wrong with that. I don't care for the Lemon song or Thank You as much. And then I don't think it's a throwaway by any means, but I think some of their albums bleed into one another heavily. This is more of an album that I feel like is just kind of rock the whole way through, except for Ramble On is really the only one where they kind of bring it down a little bit. And What Is and What Should Never Be, but that's almost more blues based, and that one gets jamming at some point. But
yeah,
that's my Led Zeppelin rant, I guess, for the week of 1969 on the show.
Yeah. We'll have many more as the years go on, at least in this time period, because I'm sure once Houses of the Holy hits, I'm going to go fucking nuts over Houses
I'm glad we're
Holy.
both right there with one another on that, though, because that's like probably one of my favorites as well.
Yeah. So you have listed here on yours Abbey Road, and we have to talk about that too. So Abbey Road, and this is also one of mine too. This is why I'm bringing it up. I feel like Abbey Road, and as I've said before, is like probably the best Beatles album. My personal favorite is Rubber Soul, but I think as far as like an album altogether as like a cohesive unit, like you were talking about, I think this is the best one, especially that thing at the end. I don't know what to even say. The medley at the end is like fantastic.
Yeah,
with
the last 7 where you never give me your money, which goes into. Is it Polythene Pam? I can't even
think
remember.
So. I think it's, or is it the Sun King?
Mr. Mustard. Or maybe Sun King. I don't know. Yeah, I
don't remember. But all of that whole thing is great. But then like there's tracks like Something, which is like one of my favorite Beatles.
That's probably one of my favorite Beatles songs ever. And it took a really long time for me to start digging that song a lot. I don't know, like, what is it about that song? Like, we'll just stop on that one for a second, because that was one of the ones that I did single out that I wanted to mention.
It's because what I personally like, and it's weird to even say it because I think Ringo Starr is a kind of a garbage drummer, but I really like the drums in the chorus part, and how, like, not just the drums, but how everything flows together in that entire chorus part. I think it just sounds awesome. Like, that part just sounds really cool to me. The rest of the song is like really slow and whatever, and then it builds up to that chorus, and I think it just builds up really nicely, and that's why I personally like it.
There's something about George's playing on that song too that always, like, it's not even the words or anything like that, and it's just his very subtle picking on that song. Like it's kind of a cliche. It strikes a chord with me for some reason. I don't really know why.
Puns.
Yeah, music puns. I don't know why. There's something about that song, something about something that really just I don't know. And I used to not like the song at all, and then I don't know.
I've come to enjoy, and this is one that's written by George Harrison. I've come to like every George Harrison song because I feel like he's just underrated as far as like all the Beatles are concerned. He doesn't get enough recognition at all, and a lot of the songs that he does are like my personal favorites out of anything that they've done ever, and this is one of them.
Well, he also so on this album he also did "Here Comes the Sun," which is potentially like one of their 5 most famous songs ever as a group. Yeah. And like I'd say out of his contributions to the Beatles, that's probably the one most people are familiar with, if I had to take a guess. He also wrote something though. So
he wrote something.
So the 2 we've brought up on this album first really quickly are the 2 that he wrote. Here Comes the Sun is great though.
Oh yeah, that was the song that really interested me the most when I was first listening to this album. That was like my favorite, and I learned it on guitar like that day. I was all excited about it.
Did you ever learn how to play Octopus's Garden?
I think Octopus's Garden. It's, you know what? Again, Ringo Starr, not a big fan. Octopus's Garden, pretty awesome song. It's super weird. So totally.
I've come around on that song just because I've accepted how weird it is, and I just accidentally played it off my phone. It's a totally weird song, but I like it for some reason. Again, this whole album front to back, it is very good.
Yeah, Come Together is like the first one, which is a standout track that everybody knows and everybody's covered. Like everybody.
Aerosmith to your neighbors across the street who have a garage band.
Yeah, like they've all done it. I Want You is like one of my favorites too. I think that's a great song. And then I think it ends really well with The End in Her Majesty. Like that's a really good song to really not just end that album, but like to end.
Well, that's such a unique thing,
I guess.
That whole stringing together of it's 7 straight songs. So it goes, You Never Give Me Your Money, into Sun King, into Mean Mr. Mustard, which then goes into Polythene Pam, which is then She Came In Through the Bathroom Window, and then Golden Slumbers, Carry That Way, in The End. I don't really think anybody had toyed around and done anything like that before them. And you've seen certain people try to do it since then, though.
Really, the only other band that like kind of did it, and this goes into the whole concept album thing. What was the Who? Like the Who did Tommy at this point. Yeah. There are other bands before them that did concept albums like other than them than the Who, but Tommy's really the big one.
As far as the concept album thing goes, yeah, there was other groups before them that did it, but I feel like most people look back at Abbey Road for some reason when they are trying to find a way to like seamlessly blend all those songs together. Like it had been done before, but this is the one that feel like people always look back on. Like even Billy Joel's song Scenes from an Italian Restaurant. He talks about how that song, if you know that song, Michael, he talks about he formatted that song basically in the same way that they formatted the end of Abbey Road, where he had all of these separate pieces. Mm-hmm. And he didn't know what to do with any of them. And he's like, really like Abbey Road. I'll just kind of bring them all together somehow and we'll make it work.
Yeah.
So I don't know. Like this album, it really is maybe their best one. Just kind of objectively looking at it, I think. Not even like when looking at it just from the hits, but the quality of what's on the album, plus the hits, plus the production behind it is really impressive. Plus, this sounds like a strange thing to mention too, but the album cover, like everyone knows that album cover and everyone tries to rip it off in some way.
Yeah.
Like it's probably one of the most recognizable covers of all time.
Definitely. I always remember that Powerpuff Girls episode with Mojo Jojo as basically was the John Lennon, and then they had like a girl monkey that was Yoko Jojo, I think was the name, and like it was like the entire like Beatles history in the form of like Powerpuff Girls villains. It was freaking hilarious. They were called the Beat Alls.
I think I remember that episode.
Oh, dude, actually. It's great. It's so good. Powerpuff Girls are great. Anyway, the last album you have here is "Let It Bleed" by the Rolling Stones, which I think was a late entry.
Yeah, I threw that one in there towards the end. You had mentioned it before. I'm not a huge Stones guy, but the tracks they have on "Let It Bleed" are really great. I mean, kicking it off with "Give Me Shelter," I'm pretty sure is the first track on the album.
It is. "Give Me Shelter." "Let It Bleed" is a great one. That entire album, like that's an album for me that kind of gave me more respect for Rolling Stones, just because the only thing I've heard was like 80s Stones, or like kind of the popular stuff that I really did not like. And the way how this stuff just sounds, and maybe it's the way it's recorded partially, and then also just the song subject matter and the songs themselves, how they sound, like all of it sounds great. And like front to back, I think that album is a really good album.
Yeah, it closes up with "You Can't Always Get What You Want," which did make like I said, that was the B-side of Honky Tonk Women, but it's also on this album in its normal form. And again, Honky Tonk Women's on this album, but it's a country version of the song called "Country Honk."
Yeah,
so that's a little bit different.
So yeah, I really enjoy that album quite a bit. I'm not going to really say much else about it.
Yeah, I mean, I don't have anything too deep dive to go into them because I'm not really personally invested in them. But that's a solid Stones album, I think, for sure.
Yeah. What are your favorite songs from this year?
So the one that I thought was cool was "Space Oddity" by David Bowie came out this year, and it came out near the time that we landed on the moon. So that's actually kind of a cool syncing thing that I never realized happened, and it was obviously done pretty purposeful. So that released this year. That's one of the better Bowie songs, and I think it's a little cliche to say that, but that's just a timeless song that I think everybody loves. Yeah. And sometimes the most popular songs are popular for a reason, and I think that's one of the ones. It's just totally unique. Like there's really the one thing I wanted to mention about the Beatles too, and some of the other tracks from this year that we're discussing, is that they still feel fresh somehow. Almost 50 years removed from their recordings, which is really unique. And I think "Space Oddity" is another one of those tracks that just, even in today's landscape where everything is electronic and stuff like that, there's really nothing else I know to compare that song to.
The thing that I loved about Bowie, just in general, is that he always feels like he was a step ahead of everybody, right? You listen to stuff from like station to station, and you're like, that if you were to just listen to it and you were to ask somebody like, when did this album come out, they'd probably say like 1982, right? Yeah. And it's like 1978 or 76, because that was the
76, yeah,
76, like 8 years, like an 8-year difference of like from the 80s almost, or it's 4 years, I guess, whatever. It's just like he's always ahead of the time, I feel like, and he's always been great. He's one of my favorites.
It's I mean, and we've mentioned it here, but it's cool looking back and seeing like which songs or which albums are continue to stay relevant moving forward into the future. Like it's easy to make a song that charts well on the billboards for that year, but it's really hard to make a song that still sounds, like I said, fresh almost 40, 50 years later compared to everything else that's come out. Yeah. So I think that's a true testament to some of these artists at the time. As far as other tracks go, Bob Dylan's "Lay Lady Lay." I really don't care for Bob Dylan that much at all. I've actually started to like him a lot more the past few years. I will say that he's one of those guys that I didn't originally like, and I've started ingraining myself more in his music, and I do like a lot of his stuff.
Yes. I legitimately been like kind of just going into that too, like a week ago. So
it's taken me a while. Like at this point, I think I can say that I do like him. But it depends. Some of his stuff gets weird and offbeat really quickly. But he came out with "Lay Lady Lay" this year, and that is probably one of my favorite single tracks by him. I didn't feel like it was worth talking about the entire album, so I just put that one song off the album because that song's one of my favorites that he does. So that's a good Dylan track. And then Neil Diamond came out with "Sweet Caroline," which I felt had to be mentioned. I felt like that had to be mentioned in some capacity, or else we weren't doing.
How did that not chart
It was like it was like top 15. So that one
Okay.
was pretty high up there.
I was gonna
I'll
say.
give Billboard a little credit with that one. But yeah, that Sweet Caroline. If you don't know that song, why I don't know. You'll know it soon enough. Like, I don't think you can function in normal society and not hear that song at some point. The last song I wanted to mention was "Touch Me" by The Doors, which is maybe one of my favorite songs by them. It
Definitely
came.
one of mine too.
It was so this year they released The Soft Parade, which was not a great album. It had some good tracks on it. Tell All the People is a good one. Touch Me, and then Wishful Sinful is good, and that's about it. Like, The Soft Parade is probably The Doors' worst album, and most people agree with that. But Touch Me is one of their best tracks, like, ever. Like, that is the singular track off of that album that most people know, and that, I mean, just simple as that. Like, if you're going to know a song off of that album, it is that. And if you're going to know a Doors song in general, that's probably top 3 or 5, I would say. That song's just amazing. I love the Vegas-y vibe that it gives off, the almost a lounge singing type feel it has to it, while also being still part of that time with the keyboards and things like that. Definitely one of my favorite Doors songs. I'm a big fan of the Doors. I like a ton of their music. But that song specifically is just awesome.
Yeah. I mean, going into that, like, I'm not a big Doors fan. I don't really care much for them. I respect Jim Morrison and his writing. I think they're all great musicians. Just never got really into them. But Touch Me is the song that I do like from the Doors. So, and I don't know why it is.
And it's so simple in one respect, with just the slow buildup of the dun 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 dun.
Yeah.
Like, it's so, but it's catchy because of that.
Yeah. So I'm with you, and that is my favorite Doors song. But yeah, I've never really been into Doors at all, and that was my favorite song.
It's one of Morrison's better vocal tracks, I'd have to say too, just because he does have that kind of growl in his voice, almost with the come on now.
Yeah.
So I freaking love that song though. It's so good.
It's great. So,
but that's everything for me.
Yeah. Mine are mostly just albums. I have one song. I'll just get into the one song. Was Kick Out the Jams by MC5 from the live album Kick Out the Jams. So I just think this song was it's a very, very popular song. If you heard it, you'd know it. And I think a lot of the stuff that ended up influencing a lot of punk stuff, and we're going to get into that as well in just a moment, came out in this year. Like, Kick Out the Jams is very much got punky vibes to it. Just from, like, right from the beginning, let's kick out the jams, motherfuckers. Like, that's a total, like, punk thing to say, and I'm sure whatever. I mean, it was an awesome thing.
That was kind of the start of this genre in a way.
Yeah.
This was like this album was, or this song more specifically, I guess, was like one of the earliest signals of that genre becoming.
Yeah, and also, just going back to, like, the historical stuff, like, MC5 are very much in that political thing. They talk about the politics of that time, and if you want to listen to a band that does do that, like, the MC5 would be that band to check out, at least if you wanted to watch or listen to more political driven music. My next ones are all albums, as I said before. I just got into this guy very recently, like within the month, and he's become like one of my favorite singer, songwriters, guitarists, and is kind of influencing me as far as songwriting. But Nick Drake, who's it's a folk musician, came out with his debut album 5 Leaves Left, and I don't know what it is that I like about it. I think it's because of how, like, depressing it kind of is, because I read up a little bit about him too, and he had come out with only 3 albums, and he suffered from, like, insane depression. He was super depressed. He ended up killing himself, like, after the 3rd one, which was Pink Moon, which I think Pink Moon is probably his most notable album if you were to ever know anything by him, and it would be that title track. But 5 Leaves Left came out. I really enjoy that album. I like it more than all the other albums that he's come out with as well. So it's got a cool folky vibe to it. Tommy is another one that I have on here, and I love concept albums. Like I don't know what it is about them. I like that they tell a story, and I feel like even if it's not a concept album, I feel like every album tells a story in some sort of fashion. But Tommy specifically does tell a specific story, and I think it's a really weird and off one. But I specifically chose this one because Keith Moon, like how I talked about Led Zeppelin, Keith Moon is another one who influenced me, and this was the album that really influenced my drum style. So Tommy is just an awesome album. I really like the song Christmas on it. That's probably my favorite track off of that one. The next album I have is In the Court of the Crimson King by King Crimson, which if you like prog, like if you're interested in prog music at all, definitely listen to Court of the Crimson King, which has 21st Century Schizoid Man. That's the track that everybody knows from it, or the title track. So then I got The Stooges by The Stooges. I Want to Be Your Dog is probably one of the famous ones on there. Again, going back to the whole punk thing, Iggy Pop was the singer for this. So if that tells you anything about what that is,
or about what you like,
I like, I either like really folky stuff, or I like straight up garage music, or I like prog stuff. Like that's mostly what this will be. But yeah, the Stooges debuted their first album, and it's awesome. It's just, again, solid garagey punk kind of sound to it. And I feel like, again, very much influenced the punks going forward, like in 1976, 1978, whatever. And then the last one I have in here is Everybody Knows This Is Nowhere by Neil Young and Crazy Horse, which has songs like Cinnamon Girl and Everybody Knows This Is Nowhere, which are two really great songs. And again, another person that I've always kind of liked, but I really have been getting into him recently with this whole like folk thing that I'm getting into, because I started listening to like Bob Dylan and Leonard Cohen, who I think also came out with an album this year, but it's not very good. I don't like it at all. But yeah, this one is particularly pretty great.
If you're listening to folk music, I have some like more modern people I should shoot your way.
Some Bon Iver?
No, not Bon Iver. No. Damien Rice is one from like the last 10 or 15 years. He's great. He's like probably one of my favorite artists ever.
My friend was telling me about The Tallest Man on Earth.
Tallest Man on Earth is good too. Yeah.
Yeah. So, but yeah, anyway, those are my favorites from this year.
Good list for both of us. I think, I don't know. I think it's important to mention, is because I don't know if we're about to wrap up. I know we said no B-side discussion this week either, so we didn't come into it with anything planned on that. As far as like a retrospect or whatever, if we're gonna do that next,
like what we
think about the year as a whole. We haven't really talked about it too much in depth. We talked about their albums, but I really think it's important to mention that this was the Beatles last year. Like this is
the
Beatles are objectively probably. I don't even think there's a probably. The Beatles are the greatest band ever. Like, and I just think that's almost factual, honestly.
Yeah.
Like, what they did for music and their importance in those early ages of rock and roll, like that can't be undersold. And for them to end up breaking up in 1970, I think it was around March or April when they broke up. But that all started in 69. So in 69, just to, again, catch some people up who may not know. So Abbey Road came out at the end of the year and Get Back came out early in 1970. They recorded both of those this year. So they had their rooftop performance at the start of the year, and then they were recording for the latter portion of the spring and then into the summer as well for both of those albums to get those lined up. And from everything I looked into, they were really starting to be not combative with one another, but almost to like, if you know about the Beatles, you know that John and Paul obviously wrote most of the tracks, and more often than not, the tracks that they wrote really didn't jive with the other style of music writing. So there was times where it was Paul's day to record the song that he had written, and John would come in and be like, "We're doing Paul's song today. I'm just going to take off," and he would totally leave the studio, and then the rest of them would have to record that track. He'd come in and do his parts eventually or whatever for it, but I mean, there's some tracks they didn't even need him on, so he would just take off. And I don't know if Paul did that as much.
I don't know.
I don't think I didn't read that he did it as much. I was reading this more about in terms of Abbey Road. So I'm not sure what happened with Get Back or anything like that. But this was their last year together as a band, which is pretty notable, which is pretty huge, because then you had John dying a few years later, and then, I mean, I don't know. I think most people know what ended up kind of happening from here. So their last performance together as a group, huge. Recording of their last 2 albums that they put out as a group, huge. I mean, again, just, it's not like they never went on to do anything else though, because I think immediately the following year, the 4 of them all put out solo records. Like, that's how much they recorded back then. Like, the second they split up, they all had solo records to go record, and they all immediately put them out the following year. And obviously those, whether it be John Lennon's solo work or Paul with Wings or whatever it may be, George and Ringo's solo stuff, like, they all had success with their solo work. So it's not like they never went on to do anything else. But as a group, and being the most important group to ever exist, for this to be their final year together, I think is pretty huge.
Yeah. And I did say, I mean, I said that, like, I'm not a big fan of Ringo Starr. I think he's a shitty drummer, all that stuff. Like, honestly, in a real life scenario, Paul McCartney is actually probably a better drummer than Ringo Starr is. But that doesn't mean that I think that he is an integral part in the Beatles. Like, his drumming style is the reason why the Beatles sound like the Beatles. Like, he has a particular thing that fits with that band very well. I don't like his solo stuff. It's super whatever. I don't care. But, like, but he is an integral part for the Beatles and for their sound. And, you know, like I said, like, there are songs like Something or Come Together that are very much like, if you were to give that person that track at that time, they would not have played that song anywhere near how Ringo Starr played that song. And it's perfect. So, I mean, I don't like Ringo Starr, whatever, but, like, he's certainly an integral part in that band, and everybody is in that band too.
That's what, and that was the other thing I was going to say, is that we talked in previous episodes about how insane it is that Robert Plant, Jimmy Page, John Bonham, and John Paul Jones, like, all came together and formed a band, and they're all considered like maybe the best ever in, like, their respective positions in that group. And then you've got Rush, who it's like a similar thing. Like, all of those guys may be considered the best in their positions. It's insane though that the Beatles, those 4 guys coming together, and you're right, like, that group, Ringo gets a lot of crap for not being that good of a drummer or things like that, but they wouldn't be the Beatles without him at the same time, because of what he contributed to the band. And there will never be a band like them ever again together, because for a multitude of reasons, which we could get into, whether it be timing or like the importance of music during that time or whatever. But yeah, just Paul McCartney, John Lennon, George Harrison, and Ringo Starr all coming together. That's never going to happen again. Like, 4 songwriters on that level is never going to happen again, ever.
No, probably.
And I've often made cases that Radiohead is the modern day Beatles.
You're totally wrong.
And I could lay that case out for you right here and right now.
No, we're not going to do that. You could do that.
See, that's the thing.
Honey comes out.
Actually, we did. That was last week, and we didn't.
Oh, it was. That was.
So, but yeah, I'm not saying they are the Beatles. I'm saying that there's similarities between them, and I could lay out what I think those are. But I don't think, even if the Beatles aren't your favorite band, like, I've met plenty of people who are like, I don't like the Beatles, they're not that good. I'm like, well, they're the best ever. Like, I'm sorry, you just have to admit that.
Yeah, it's at a point where they've influenced so many musicians and so many, just, it's insane how many musicians are influenced by them, whether it's through the transitive property or not. Like, you like this one band, well, guess who they like? They like the Beatles, and they're very much influenced by them, and they influence just pop music in general. So they're a huge part of music, and it sucks to see that they didn't get along. And I think it's mostly John Lennon. John Lennon had a very big anger problem and a lot of social issues with him. But yeah, it just sucks that would have happened, because they could have done a lot more cool stuff once it got to the 80s and 90s and all that.
I mean,
stuff.
that's what sucks most about John eventually dying, which I assume we'll get to whenever that happens. What year that was, I forget.
I don't know.
I'm sure we'll talk about that. But yeah, I mean, that's what sucks is they did split up, but it didn't seem like this is a forever thing.
Yeah.
It's like most groups who split up get back together at some point. And it didn't seem like the blood was bad enough between the four of them that would have never happened again ever. But then John died, and yeah, it's never going to happen again ever.
Yeah. Then George died around...
It was 2001 was when George died. So.
Yeah. So, yeah, they could have, but...
I mean, I assume they would have at some point. But
yeah.
But then maybe we don't get half of the good music we got from Paul.
That's true.
Band on the Run and everything else he did with Wings. So
yeah, there's some terrific stuff from there. And even from George Harrison, I love What Is Life by him. I thought that's an awesome one. Oh Sweet Lord's a really cool song too. So, or My Sweet Lord.
My Sweet Lord. Yeah, I think that's it.
Yeah. I think those are two great tracks too. And yeah, I mean, we probably wouldn't have gotten those songs if they had broken up. For me personally, what I thought was like significant about this year, and I guess maybe maybe not this year, but this like maybe 1-2 years, like give or take, like maybe 68, 69, 70. I feel like this was like the birth of a lot of like the subgenres of music.
Mm-hmm.
So like I said before, like there's a lot of like the Stooges and MC5 are like kind of helped make punk a thing, with not only just their music and how they play and their like kind of sloppy style of sorts, but also like their mentality of like this not give a shit attitude that they had with their music as well.
Yeah.
I think that helped influence later on like the punk genre, whereas like also the metal genre, I think also kind of developed here with bands like, I mean, we're getting close to Black Sabbath. We're getting to like Blue Cheer is typically...
I think Black Sabbath's formed at this point, actually.
Yeah,
I think they've put out some albums.
They might have put out Black Sabbath. Like that would have been the album that would have came out, I think. But what was it? Yeah, Blue Cheer is usually noted as like the beginning of metal. And I don't know if you've ever listened to Blue Cheer, but I'm pretty sure they're the ones who made the song Summertime Blues. And it's like this just heavy, like super distorted, like just incredible track. And I think their version of Summertime Blues is probably my favorite personally. And it's awesome. And that entire album is super cool. And I think it's called Vincebus Eruptum, some weird name. But yeah, this was kind of the birthplace of like just a bunch of subgenres that helped make like punk and metal and all this stuff.
Yeah, like I agree with that. Like I think, I mean, a lot of early rock is attributed to Elvis, and rightly so. And then, but I feel like after Elvis, the torch was kind of passed to the Beatles. And when you look at the Beatles' early stuff, it was very much kind of samey with what rock was considered around that time. Yeah. And then I think you saw a dramatic shift when they got into like, when they got some money and they were able to buy some new toys to play around with, and they started touring around the world, and George got his hands on a sitar and all that kind of stuff. You saw a change in their music, and I think you saw a change in a lot of other bands' music. I don't think the Beatles were necessarily the catalyst for that change, but
I just think the time period was.
I just think that time. I agree. Like early '60s music is samey in a lot of ways, and then I think once you get into the mid and late '60s, they start experimenting a lot more, and you start seeing a lot more abstract stuff. Like Pink Floyd starts coming around with what they were doing, but even early Pink Floyd is very tied to that time period, that early '60s time period at first, and then they don't really become Pink Floyd until more of the '70s.
Yeah, I mean, but they had Uma Guma come out this year, which was like kind of some tracks from before and then some newer ones, I believe, because I know Astronomy Domine or Domini or however you want to say it came out, and that's like a really trippy one, and that was even on their first album too. But yeah, like I think specifically like 67 to like 69 very much had like drastic shift of like musical direction, like how people go about how they just play.
And then
really.
that bleeds off into like country and stuff like that, which country was well established at this point. Like country had been around for a really long time, but I think country was starting to take a little bit more from rock as well too.
Yeah.
Like you look back at like Johnny Cash and guys like that now, and I think most people consider them to be rock artists before they consider them to be country. But at that time, that was country music for that time.
Yeah, I mean, really, country music helped develop rock music, because if you look at like Elvis Presley, he was a country artist. Elvis, I think you can even say like Buddy Holly and stuff like that. All these people that are like rock and roll people were really country artists in the beginning. So.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. I mean, I guess that would be kind of my whole spiel too. I know I spent mine talking about the Beatles, but yeah, I think this year was where you started to see those things split off, because eventually it gets into where there's a million subgenres.
Well, like at this point, like right after, like at this period, we get like prog rock and like freaking different. Then there's like 20 billion different metals. Like
then you get into the where we're at now in the present, and it's like indie punk, ska, folk,
gent,
like emo. I don't know. I'm just naming
whatever
random genres I can think of.
Yeah,
but yeah, because it used to be very much confined to that one single rock umbrella, and then it split off. And there was a lot more.
Absolutely. So yeah, that's just my piece on it. My big takeaway from it, and I believe, Logan, that is it for Reeling in the Years 1969. Nice. What a show. Good show.
That's fun. Yeah. It's hard. I always feel like I got to do more research, especially when we bring up questions way through. I'm like, I don't know the answer, but sometimes the questions are so obscure that we're asking. And
yeah, I mean, it's going to be, this one's definitely going to be our harder one to like get down, I guess, in a sense. But it's always fun. I always like to. It's a learning experience, not just for the listeners, but like for us as well. I think it's really interesting to go look and see how different like things were, and looking like specifically like the Billboard like top 10 thing like always boggles my mind. I'm like, what? Like, how was this number one? So that's something I always want to go back to all the time. But yeah, that was Reeling in the Years. Thank you all for listening and or watching live if you were. Logan, what are all your Twitters and handles and stuff?
You can follow me on Twitter at Moorman12. Follow Model Citizens on Twitter at ModelPods. And then the website, modelcitizensmedia.com.
Absolutely. And you can follow me at super_ruse on Twitter. And also, you should go to www.modelcitizensmedia.com and check out more of our shows, like the Model Citizen Show. And I don't know why I'm totally blanking, Behind the Pixel and Millennial Gaming Speak. And if you're into games and nerd stuff. So thank you again. We will see you guys.
What are we doing next week?
Next week, we're going to do 2015. Yeah.
Rap music. We'll do that in honor of Kendrick's new album that's coming out this week.
Yeah.
Not that we're going to talk about that, but Kendrick will be discussed.
We'll discuss Kendrick.
2015.
We'll be able to compare it to something new, I guess.
Yeah, that's true.
So yeah. Later, guys. Goodbye.
Bye.